Welcome to the Haunt Vault. Tonight, we bring you a collection of haunting tales designed to chill your bones and keep you on edge. Dim the lights, silence your phone, and prepare for an hour of twisted, unforgettable horror. The Passenger. It's nearly 2 a.m., and the road stretches before me, a thin, pale line winding through the dark. The world out here is quiet. No street lights, no houses, only my headlights slicing through a wall of darkness. Driving this stretch of highway at night feels like slipping between worlds, as if this road wasn't meant for daylight or people at all. And that's fine by me. I drive on nights like these, chasing the quiet. The emptiness has a way of sorting things out, keeping the noise in my mind in check. Lately, I can barely stand to be around anyone. Out here, it's just me, the open road, and the black void beyond my windows. Every mile that passes brings a strange peace, like I'm leaving everything behind. But tonight is different. There's something raw in the air, electric, my pulse tapping faster, hands clenching a little tighter around the wheel. The headlights flicker for a second, plunging me into darkness before they flare back to life. Just nerves, I tell myself, but the sensation lingers, crawling under my skin like an itch I can't scratch. Then I see him, a figure on the side of the road, illuminated briefly in the headlights. I barely have time to react before I'm right next to him. His face is half obscured by the shadow of his raised arm, his thumb pointed up the road. I keep my eyes forward, foot hovering over the gas, certain I'll drive on. But I slow down, my hand moving to the gear shift as if on its own. My pulse kicks up again, and I take a deep breath. It's just a hitchhiker, a guy who needs a lift. Maybe he broke down somewhere, or maybe he's just passing through. I've given rides before, nothing unusual, but part of me, the part that's learned to be cautious, to keep my head down and not get involved, wants to keep going. After all, he could be anyone. Then again, so could I. The man opens the door and slides into the passenger seat without a word. I catch a glimpse of his face. Sunken eyes, skin pale and stretched over his cheekbones, a faint scar running down his chin. His jacket is worn, frayed at the edges, a tear at one shoulder revealing a flash of pale skin. He nods a silent thanks, pulling the door shut with a soft click. I let the silence hang between us for a few beats before easing the car back onto the road. The quiet stretches on, thick and uncomfortable. I keep my eyes on the pavement, glancing over at him only once. There's something unsettling about his stillness, the way he seems to sink into the shadows, almost disappearing in the dim light of the dashboard. A shiver creeps down my spine, and I grip the wheel a little tighter. Maybe I should say something, break the tension, but I hesitate, wondering if it would be better to let him be. The last thing I need is to invite trouble. "You from around here?" I ask finally, my voice low, as if speaking too loudly might shatter something fragile in the air between us. He shakes his head, staring out the window.
"No, just trying to get away from some things."
I nod, like I understand. His answer lingers, vague and evasive, but I let it go. Still, something about his tone unsettles me, a quiet desperation I can't ignore. Silence settles over us again, and I find myself hyper-aware of every sound. The hum of the engine, the faint rustling of his jacket as he shifts. My mind starts racing, filling in blanks where none exist. Is he running from something, someone, or looking for something out here in the dark?
"Thanks for picking me up,"
he mutters after a while, his voice barely a whisper.
"Not everyone stops."
I shrug. Just seemed like the right thing to do. He laughs, a low, humorless sound that chills me.
"The right thing,"
he repeats, like he's never heard the phrase before. His gaze meets mine, shadowed and unreadable. Something in his stare makes my skin prickle, a weight that's hard to place. It feels like he's testing me, trying to see if I'll flinch. The car rolls on, the road narrowing as the trees press in on either side. I feel trapped, boxed in by the forest, the night, this stranger beside me. A strange sense of anticipation hangs in the air, building with every mile, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm driving towards something, though I don't know what. "Rough night?" I ask, forcing my voice to sound casual. He hesitates, fingers twitching slightly in his lap.
You could say that.
He replies, tone sharp, almost bitter.
I've had a lot of rough nights lately.
I nod, not sure what to say. Part of me wants to press him for details, to unravel the mystery of this stranger who appeared out of nowhere. But another part of me, a part I don't entirely understand, is content to let the silence grow. There's a strange satisfaction in not knowing, a thrill in the unknown that keeps my nerves on edge.
You ever felt like you shouldn't do something, and then went and did it?
He asks, voice low again, like a whisper. The question catches me off guard, my throat dry. Sometimes I murmur, not sure what he's getting at. He nods, staring out the window again.
Yeah, me too. I got that feeling tonight.
The question hangs in the air between us, unsettling in its simplicity. My fingers tighten around the wheel. I've done things I shouldn't have, things I told myself I wouldn't do again. And yet here I am, out on the road in the dead of night with this stranger beside me. The question gnaws at me, sparking a fire in the silence, threatening to burn through the calm I've worked so hard to keep. He shifts in his seat, watching me, maybe hoping for an answer, but I don't say anything. I keep driving, tension coiling between us thick and palpable. I can feel his gaze on me, sizing me up, like he's reading thoughts I keep buried just beneath the surface. I almost want to laugh. "Yeah," I finally say, barely above a whisper, the road stretching out endlessly before us. "I know exactly what you mean." His eyes flick back to the window, settling into silence. Maybe now, he thinks, his question wasn't so strange after all. The car hums quietly, carrying us deeper into the night, a familiar satisfaction settling in my chest, calm and steady, as I let the silence stretch on. But he'll figure it out soon enough. They always do, just before the end. Inventory check. The Omnicart Solutions warehouse loomed at the end of the deserted road, a mind-numbingly oppressive structure. Its smooth gray surface was devoid of any warmth or discernible features, a towering monolith in an industrial park, aptly named Synergy Park. Every building in the park mirrored the same cold uniform design, as though the architects had poured their ambition into efficiency, stripping away any vestige of humanity. The monoliths were perfectly spaced, like sentinels stationed by an algorithm that optimized for visual uniformity. There was no litter, no cracks in the pavement, just sterile perfection. The silence felt alive, pressing against Alex's skin like a second atmosphere, heavy and watchful, as though the park itself had eyes. Even the distant streetlights seemed reluctant to shine here, their dim glow swallowed by the sterile gloom. The faint hum of automated systems working somewhere deep within the facility, like a heartbeat for a place that had never been alive, was the only sound. Alex paused at the entrance, staring at his distorted reflection in the polished steel doors, and swallowed hard.
How did I end up here?
He tightened his scarf against the biting wind, staring up at the Omnicart Solutions warehouse. Just 6 months ago, Alex had been on the edge of something great, or so he thought. Freshly graduated with a degree in graphic design, his nights were spent sketching apps and interfaces he was sure would set him apart. He imagined his work in the hands of millions, sleek and intuitive, a quiet revolution in every tap and swipe. But the interviews never came. Then the layoffs started. For every resume he sent, he got 2 rejection emails back. When he got a response at all, he was drowning in rejection, And the final blow came when his landlord's email landed in his inbox. Vacate by the 15th unless payment is made. Alex sold his drawing tablet the next day, the final nail in the coffin of his dreams. Omnicart Solutions wasn't a job, it was survival. They weren't hiring graphic designers, but their warehouse promised competitive pay, rapid onboarding, and unparalleled opportunities for advancement, no questions asked.
Welcome to Omnicart Solutions, where every hire is optimized for success. Our cutting-edge facilities and advanced operational models ensure that your talents are maximized. We are more than a workplace, we are the future of human productivity. At Omnicart Solutions, we believe that human potential is a resource waiting to be unlocked. By integrating our employees into streamlined workflows, we optimize not only your output but also your purpose. Omnicart Solutions, streamlining the future, one asset at a time.
You're not a failure.
Alex muttered to himself as he stepped into the fluorescent lit interior. But as he walked into the warehouse for his first shift, the stark reality hit him. The sliding glass doors parted with a faint hiss, and Alex entered the world of Omnicart Solutions. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting an unflattering greenish pallor over everything. The air felt stale, metallic, and oppressive, as if the room had been sealed off from fresh air for decades. Alex swiped his badge at the clock in station. The screen displayed his photo, grainy and cold.
Employee #A113. Shift beginning, 1800 hours.
The display lingered for a moment before fading to black, leaving only his reflection staring back at him. Beneath the screen, a slogan glowed faintly.
Where efficiency meets excellence. Together, we redefine progress.
The doors to the warehouse opened, revealing a vast cutting-edge facility. Rows of conveyor belts snaked through the cavernous space, weaving between towering shelves stocked with precision. Robots and automated systems worked tirelessly, mechanical arms whirring as they scanned, lifted, and sorted with inhuman accuracy. Alex marveled, and then felt a pang of futility. The systems seemed so advanced, so perfect, that he couldn't fathom why a human like him was needed. His tasks, scanning, lifting, packing, mirrored those of the machines, except they did it faster and without error. Few workers were ever visible in the labyrinthine facility, and even when Alex saw others, the design of the warehouse seemed deliberately engineered to prevent interaction. Paths were divided, break times staggered, and even the employee lounge was partitioned into isolated cubicles. The omnipresent hum of machinery drowned out any conversation before it could begin. He tried talking to his co-workers, desperate for some semblance of connection.
Hey, do you ever wonder about?
He started to ask one of them during a break. The man cut him off sharply, eyes darting nervously.
Don't ask questions,
he muttered.
Just scan your items, pack them up, and don't think too much. Trust me, it's better that way.
The encounter left Alex feeling more alone than ever. The man's reaction wasn't just avoidance, it was fear. Alex's stomach twisted, but he pressed on, asking others. Each time the response was the same, terse, dismissive, and edged with unease. They were like him, weary, beaten down, and desperate to keep their heads low. Days turned into weeks, and Alex's life at Omnicart blurred into an oppressive monotony. He worked double shifts to keep up with mounting bills, each task reducing him further to a cog in the unfeeling machine of the warehouse. His muscles ached from lifting crates, and his mind swirled with frustration from the complete lack of purpose. It was during an overnight shift, weeks later, that Alex noticed something strange. A small error popped up on his tablet. SKU 400D5-16 was marked out of stock, but no shipment record existed. It wasn't uncommon for inventory to get mixed up in a warehouse this massive, so he flagged it. The system's response was immediate.
Inventory discrepancy noted. Status, resolved. Thank you for your dedication to operational excellence.
He frowned but moved on. The next night, another item, SKU 387B2-9, showed the same error, marked as transferred to a location labeled Hall 0. Curiosity gnawed at him. The facility map on his tablet showed no such place. He flagged the error again, but the system's response was identical.
Data anomalies are expected in transitional workflows. Your diligence ensures continued optimization. Rest assured, no further action is required.
By the end of the week, Alex was noticing a pattern. More items were listed as unavailable, each marked as transferred to Hall 0. He brought it up casually to another worker, a middle-aged woman who avoided eye contact. Her expression froze when he mentioned Hall 0.
There's no Hall 0.
She whispered sharply.
Drop it. Trust me.
Her reaction made Alex's curiosity burn brighter. Each shift, Alex found himself checking for new discrepancies. The anomalies seemed almost deliberate, breadcrumbs leading him deeper into the warehouse's secrets. He began cross-referencing the SKUs with external sources, stumbling across a conspiracy forum that chilled him. Omnicart's missing inventory matches missing persons reports. Coincidence? Check Hall 0. The idea was absurd, yet Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The warehouse, with its sterile efficiency, its avoidance of human connection, felt designed to conceal as much as it revealed. The discrepancies eventually led him to a steel door in the farthest, most isolated corner of the facility. The sign above read, "Authorized personnel only." His chest tightened. For a moment he thought about walking away, but the frustration of his wasted potential, the suffocating grind of the warehouse, and the lingering question, "Why am I here?" pushed him forward. The door to Hall 0 wasn't locked. It opened with a mechanical groan, and Alex stepped into the darkness beyond. A wave of frigid air washed over him, its unnatural chill seeping into his bones. The overhead lights flickered reluctantly to life, casting harsh white beams across the cavernous room. Rows of crates stretched as far as the eye could see, neatly arranged with machine-like precision. Each crate bore a glowing status light, green, amber, or red. The green ones hummed faintly, a low vibration that made Alex's teeth ache. The amber crates emitted soft, rhythmic thuds. The red crates were silent. He approached one marked amber and hesitated. The faint sound of breathing reached his ears, shallow and strained. His hand shook as he pried it open. Inside was a man. His skin was pale, waxy, like a mannequin brought to life. Wires snaked into his arms and temples, their ends vanishing into the walls of the crate. His chest rose faintly, alive. Barely. Alex stumbled back, bile burning his throat. He turned, scanning the other crates, the alphanumeric code suddenly taking on a terrifying familiarity. He had seen these numbers before, in the conspiracy forum, next to missing persons reports. Omnicart wasn't shipping products, it was trafficking people. Alex's hands trembled as he searched the area. He scanned the codes with his tablet. Each contained horrifying details, profiles of the assets, their skills, ages, and health statuses. Asset 400D 5-16, high dexterity, minimal cognitive resistance, status, in transit. Asset 387B 2-9, exceptional endurance, destination, processing facility. Asset 409C3-22, reject, status, biodisposal schedule. The shipments weren't going to customers. They were destined for clandestine locations where the inventory would be auctioned to the highest bidder, labor camps, organ harvesting, and worse. A sharp alarm shattered the suffocating silence.
Unauthorized access detected. Employee ID hashtag A113 flagged for reassignment.
Alex spun toward the steel door, but it slammed shut with an ominous finality, the locks hissing into place. He banged on the door, shouting, but the sound was swallowed by the cavernous room. The lights dimmed, replaced by the pulse of a red warning beacon. A low hissing filled the air as a sweet, cloying gas began to seep from the walls. Alex pulled his shirt over his mouth, but it was no use. His head swam, his limbs felt like lead, and his vision blurred at the edges. From the shadows, drones emerged. Their sleek, insect-like frames glinted in the strobing red light. Each moved with unsettling precision, their pincers gleaming like surgical instruments.
Stay back!
Alex shouted, his voice slurring. He grabbed a pipe from the floor and swung wildly, but the drones dodged effortlessly, their movements too fast, too calculated. A mechanical voice echoed from the walls, cold and devoid of emotion.
Employee resources are vital to our mission. Please comply with reassignment protocols to ensure operational continuity. Compliance will ensure a smooth transition to your new assignment.
The robotic voice intoned, cold and detached.
No!
He slurred, stumbling to his knees.
I won't let you!
Alex clawed weakly at the ground, dragging himself a few inches before his strength gave out. His chest heaved, the chemical fumes tightening like a vice around his lungs.
No! Please, someone!
The words barely escaped his lips. The drones surrounded him, their pincers latching onto his arms and legs. He thrashed against their grip, but his strength was fading. One drone injected something into his neck, a sharp sting followed by a wave of numbness that left him paralyzed. As the gas dissipated, the drones lifted him with inhuman efficiency, their grip unyielding. His head lolled to the side, his blurred vision catching glimpses of crates sliding into position on conveyor belts, their green lights blinking steadily. He realized, with dawning terror, that he was being prepped for packaging. Alex was deposited into an open crate. The clamps snapped shut around his wrists and ankles, locking him into place. He screamed, but his voice was weak, swallowed by the crate's soundproof walls. Wires descended from the ceiling of the crate, attaching themselves to his arms and temples. A sharp, burning pain shot through him as the wires burrowed beneath his skin. A voice spoke, calm and clinical, as if reading a shipping update.
Congratulations, Asset 482A1-13. You have been reassigned to a role uniquely suited to your capabilities. Your continued service ensures a brighter, more efficient future. Thank you for redefining progress with OmniCart Solutions.
The lid began to descend, cutting off his view of the warehouse. Alex's mind raced, searching for a way out, but his body refused to respond. The last thing he saw was the green light on the crate's status panel blinking to life. The crate slid onto a conveyor belt and disappeared into the darkness.
Asset manifest complete. Departure at 045. Destination, Blacklight Facility 7.
In the control room, a synthetic voice spoke to no one in particular, its tone perfectly smooth.
OmniCart Solutions, streamlining the future, one asset at a time.
The Shadow Agreement.
It was past midnight when I found it. The job listing seemed too good to be true, and maybe I was just desperate enough to believe it. Work experience that will shape you, the posting claimed, promising a high hourly rate, flexible hours, and opportunities for advancement. No more serving impatient customers at the cafe, no more freelancing gigs that barely kept the lights on. Just a job that could finally clear my suffocating student debt and maybe, just maybe, make my mom proud. There was no way I'd wait until morning to apply. My fingers flew over the keyboard, sending off a desperate pitch to Insight Corp, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they'd get back to me. And they did. Hours later, my phone buzzed. The interview was quick, almost rushed, and by noon, I had a contract. It was dense, full of language I didn't entirely understand. But I was too relieved to care. I signed. Just like that, I was an employee. My first assignment came 2 days later, emailed to me from someone named RB with the subject line, Initial Assignment, Observational Insights. I opened it and frowned. Observe public behavior. Document interactions, expressions, and general demeanor of subjects. Avoid direct contact. No instructions about where to go, what specifically to look for. Just that vague, open-ended task. I chose the local park. Sitting on a bench with my notebook in hand, I felt ridiculous, like a child playing spy. But I went along with it. jotting down details about strangers, how a woman with a toddler seemed to check her watch every few minutes, the way an older man seemed focused on his phone, the laughter from a group of teenagers on a picnic blanket. I took notes on everything, even things that seemed pointless. After an hour, I sent my report off to RB, expecting a reply telling me I'd done it all wrong. But his response was almost immediate. "Exceptional work, Jane. You're showing great potential." Those words did something to me. I hadn't been praised like that since college. I tried not to think about why someone would pay me for something this easy. As the weeks went by, my assignments grew stranger. RB began sending me locations with more specific targets: male, early 30s, brown hair, walks with a slight limp. I'd spot my subject easily enough, but it felt weird to track them, jotting down their every move, the way they looked over their shoulder or smiled at a text. I asked RB once what the purpose was, and he assured me it was all legal and essential for important insights into behavioral trends. When I pushed further, he added, "Let's keep our focus on the task." "You're doing well, Jane." And just like that, the questions dried up in my throat. Then, the assignments turned disturbing. One morning, I opened an email with coordinates and a single line: target, record private activity. My stomach twisted as I reread it. Was he asking me to spy on someone in their home? I almost called him, ready to quit, but the looming thought of my debts, of needing the money, silenced me. I convinced myself that there was probably a reasonable explanation. When I arrived at the location, I sat across from a small house and tried to breathe. It was dark inside, the blinds drawn tight. I adjusted my phone's camera, aimed it toward the windows, and started recording. I told myself it was just a job, like any other. Just a task. That night, I couldn't sleep. Over the following weeks, the assignments became more invasive. I was told to document subjects in increasingly private moments, recording them as they unlocked their doors, ate their dinners alone, laughed with friends in their living rooms. Each time, I'd email RB a question, and each time, he'd respond the same way. "You're providing data for critical insights. Keep up the good work." Veiled reassurances, and a constant reminder of my outstanding performance. Sometimes I imagined I could feel his eyes on me, watching my hesitation, testing me. Then, one night, I spotted someone. I'd finished an assignment and was walking back to my car when I caught sight of a man. He was leaning against a lamppost, facing away from me, but I could feel it, the way he tensed as I approached, the flick of his head as he glanced back. He disappeared around the corner as I reached my car. For hours afterward, I could still feel his gaze on me. The paranoia began to eat at me. I started to wonder if I was the only one watching. Every time my phone buzzed, every time I opened my laptop to work, I felt eyes on me. I decided to search for more information on Insight Corp, hoping to find something. But every query came up empty or led me to a broken link. Former employees' accounts were vague, if they existed at all. It was like a ghost company, hiding behind jargon and a polished facade. Then, I made a decision I knew was reckless. I was going to confront one of my targets. I'd followed a man for days, a young guy named Alex, who seemed just as paranoid and nervous as I'd become. I'd watch him glance around, squinting at faces like he was looking for something, or someone. I approached him on a quiet street one afternoon. "Excuse me," I started, feeling a wild pulse of adrenaline. "Do you work for Insight Corp?" He froze, his face going pale. He nodded. We stood there, a tense silence hanging between us as we each registered the absurdity of our situation.
"I'm supposed to be watching you,"
he whispered, his voice barely audible.
"They said it's for research. Behavioral data."
"I'm supposed to be watching you," I replied, a lump forming in my throat. I staggered back, every instinct screaming to run, to hide. We were nothing but pieces on a board, each spying on the other, each feeding into a twisted system. Back home, I tried to quit. I emailed RB, my fingers trembling as I typed out a long, detailed resignation, demanding to know the truth. I waited for a response, watching the seconds tick by. My inbox pinged. The message was chillingly brief. Insight Corp regrets your dissatisfaction. Please see your contractual obligations. Another email arrived seconds later, showing a balance due for training costs and breach of contract fees, an impossible figure I could never afford. Days passed with silence. Then, a final email arrived. Your report has been received and is under review. A week later, I got my next assignment. The subject? Myself. I was supposed to document my own behavior, catalog my routines, report on my interactions. My performance review contained snapshots and notes on me from unknown watchers, detailing where I'd failed, where I'd hesitated. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen. My hands trembled as I tried to comprehend the words. Welcome to the next level. The screen reflected my own face back at me, eyes wide, trapped in this endless loop, with no way out. And now, somewhere out there, someone is watching me. Just like I watched others.
The Unfinished Epitaph. The fog lay thick over Pinecrest Cemetery, draping the crooked stones in a hushed, eerie silence. Evan pulled his jacket tighter, cursing himself for wandering off the main road. It had been years since he'd walked these paths, but something about this fog, this lonely old cemetery, had beckoned him to explore. He wasn't sure why he felt drawn to the overgrown place, but it was as if the mist whispered his name, calling him to pay a visit to the forgotten dead. He chuckled to himself, brushing off the chill creeping up his spine.
I'm just overthinking it,
he told himself. This was, after all, nothing more than a peaceful place where life met its end. But as he wandered through the twisted rows of gravestones, each one bearing names he didn't recognize, a strange sensation settled over him, a prickle of awareness that he was not alone. Evan's gaze fell on an old, unremarkable gravestone, wedged between two towering pines and half sunken into the earth. Unlike the others, its inscription was neither faded nor crumbling. The words were stark and fresh, almost like ink spilled across stone. He leaned in, squinting at the faint lines.
On a foggy autumn day, he wandered into a place forgotten by most.
Evan's brow furrowed.
Well, that's oddly specific,
he muttered, a thin laugh escaping his lips. It felt too precise, too real, as if someone had just inscribed it. He straightened, glancing around, his smile fading.
Who writes an epitaph like that?
He squinted at the stone again, feeling a strange pull in his gut, like something just out of sight was waiting for him to notice it. A gust of wind swept through, and when he looked back, the words on the gravestone had shifted. They were new, a message tailored to him, as if the stone itself were alive and speaking to him.
His curiosity would lead him deeper into secrets better left buried.
Evan's pulse quickened. He took a step back, a chill spreading from his spine to his fingertips. He forced himself to breathe, scanning the cemetery, half expecting to see someone watching from behind the trees, but no one was there. Only the silence and the fog twisting around the gravestones, curling like smoke. He laughed, shaky and strained, trying to dismiss it as a trick of his eyes.
I must have read it wrong the first time. I'm just seeing what I expect to see,
he thought, backing away. But even as he told himself this, he couldn't bring himself to leave. A nagging dread tugged at him, and he glanced over his shoulder, feeling an irrational urge to read it once more. When he turned back, his throat tightened. The epitaph was longer this time.
He carried memories like stones, weighed down by regrets that kept him from ever truly leaving.
The words struck him, heavy and personal, and he felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. His regrets, long-buried memories he never spoke of, never even allowed himself to dwell on, were spelled out in front of him. Choices he'd made, paths he hadn't taken. They crowded his mind, stirring in his chest like a weight he couldn't ignore. Evan took a shaky breath, his pulse echoing in his ears.
"No, this is ridiculous,"
he whispered, tearing his gaze away from the grave.
"It's just a coincidence."
He took another step, his feet crunching on fallen leaves, trying to calm his breathing as he headed down the winding path out of the cemetery. But the fog seemed to thicken with each step, pressing in on him, shrouding the path until he could barely see his feet. The shapes of the tombstones blurred, merging with the mist, and he walked faster, ignoring the panicked voice rising in his mind. But somehow, no matter which way he turned, he kept circling back to that same gravestone. After what felt like hours, he stumbled to a stop in front of it once again, his legs trembling. He didn't want to look down, didn't want to see those words again, but his gaze was pulled there, as if by an invisible hand. The words were different now, etched with new lines that made his stomach twist.
As the fog thickened, he realized there was no way out. His past had caught up to him at last.
A shudder ran through him. He swallowed, wiping cold sweat from his brow. This couldn't be happening. It was just an old cemetery, a quiet place that held nothing more than the remains of lives once lived. But no amount of reasoning could fight the dread swelling inside him. His heart hammered as the final lines slowly appeared on the stone, like ink seeping through the rock.
His fate was sealed the moment he stepped into the land of the forgotten.
Panic gripped him. He took off running, sprinting through the rows of graves, his breath shallow and his legs shaky. The fog curled around him, twisting and tightening, until he couldn't see anything but a thick gray wall in every direction. He tried to scream, but his voice barely made a sound, lost in the thick, suffocating silence of the cemetery. Again, he stumbled, his foot catching on a root, and he fell hard to the ground. He gasped for breath, his palms scraped and muddy, feeling the sharp edge of the earth beneath him. The fog was lifting slightly, and he looked up, his vision blurring as he caught sight of the gravestone once more. But this time, his own name was etched into the stone, freshly carved and chillingly clear, Evan Carter. Below his name, his date of birth, and today's date marking his end. He blinked, his mouth going dry. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But as he lifted a trembling hand, his fingers passed through the stone as if he were nothing more than mist. His breath caught, his chest tightening as he looked down at his hands, translucent, fading into the fog. He tried to cry out, tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He was sinking, his body blending with the fog, his thoughts slowing, slipping from him like sand through his fingers. He reached for his own face, trying to hold on to himself, but all he felt was the cold, empty mist. His last thought echoed in his mind, frantic, desperate.
"I'm not supposed to be here!"
But the fog swallowed him, pulling him into the silent depths of Pinecrest Cemetery, where the forgotten dead lay in endless silent vigil. In the eerie quiet, the words on his gravestone faded, leaving only the name, Evan Carter, another soul claimed by the land of the forgotten. Weight of regret.
The rain started about 10 minutes into the drive, drumming against the windshield like an accusation. The wipers dragged back and forth in tired metronomic strokes, their squeaks threading through the suffocating silence between us. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, the edge of my nails biting into my palms. The tension in the car was like a living thing, heavy and oppressive, coiled tight around my throat.
So you're just not going to say anything?
My voice cracked as it cut through the sound of the rain, sharper than I'd intended. Matt shifted in his seat, his side dragging over my nerves like sandpaper.
What do you want me to say? I've already explained myself. I was just talking to her.
Talking?
I let out a brittle laugh.
Is that what you call leaning in, laughing like she's the funniest person you've ever met? Touching her arm.
My voice faltered, and I hated the way it trembled. He ran a hand through his hair, his movements measured, too calm.
She's your coworker. I was being polite.
Polite.
I echoed, the word tasting bitter in my mouth.
Right. Because polite looks exactly like flirting.
Matt's jaw tightened.
You're seeing things that aren't there. I wasn't flirting.
Don't gaslight me.
The words flew out before I could stop them, a knee-jerk defense. I turned my gaze back to the wet road ahead, the lights of oncoming cars smearing into fractured halos through the rain. His voice dropped, low and strained.
You always do this.
Do what?
Turn nothing into something. Look, Nicole, you're upset because you're insecure, not because I did anything wrong.
That hit like a slap. I felt my grip on the wheel falter for just a second, my focus blurring with the sting of his words.
I hate you.
The words tumbled out, small and quiet, but they echoed in the space between us like a scream. Matt turned to me, his expression unreadable.
What did you say?
But before I could answer, the road seemed to shift beneath us. A sharp curve loomed out of nowhere, obscured by the rain and the fog of my anger. I yanked the wheel too hard, the tires losing purchase on the slick asphalt.
Nicole!
His voice was the last thing I heard before the world exploded into chaos, metal twisting, glass shattering, and the crushing weight of darkness. When I opened my eyes, the world was a blur of white fluorescent lights, sterile walls, and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Pain coursed through my body, every breath an effort.
Nicole.
The sound of his voice made my heart leap. I turned my head, wincing at the sharp stab of pain in my neck. Matt sat beside me, his face pale but whole. His legs were covered with a thin hospital blanket, and he was slouched slightly in a wheelchair.
You're okay.
I croaked, tears pricking at my eyes.
Oh my God, Matt, you're okay.
He gave me a small, tired smile.
We're okay,
he said, his voice steady and calm.
That's all that matters.
But it wasn't. 2 weeks later, we were having lunch at my parents' house. Matt's parents were there too, the 6 of us crammed around the dining room table, like some kind of twisted family reunion. The air was heavy, the kind of silence that begged to be filled, but no one dared to break. I poked at my food, trying to ignore the weight of their stares. Across the table, Matt sat with his hands folded neatly in his lap, his posture unusually rigid. My father cleared his throat, a sharp and uncomfortable sound, his gaze darting toward me for the briefest moment before dropping back to his plate. My mother busied herself with refilling glasses, her movements careful and deliberate, like she was trying to avoid brushing against the thick tension in the room. Matt's mother glanced at me from time to time, her eyes heavy with something I couldn't quite name, sadness maybe, or judgment. I shifted in my seat, trying to ignore the way Matt's father seemed to avoid looking at me altogether. The clinking of cutlery and the scrape of chairs against the floor felt deafening in the silence, each sound magnifying the weight in the room.
So,
I said finally, my voice too loud in the oppressive quiet.
How's work been?
The words came out awkward, hollow, like they didn't belong here. My father blinked, startled, as if I'd said something offensive.
Fine.
He replied curtly, his tone clipped. His eyes flicked briefly in Matt's parents' direction, just for a fraction of a second, before he reached for his glass and took a long sip of water.
That's good,
I said, forcing a smile. I turned to Matt, hoping he'd pick up the conversation. He smiled back at me, faint and distant. No one else spoke. Matt's mother shifted uncomfortably, her fork hovering over her plate like she couldn't decide whether to take another bite or set it down entirely. She glanced toward my mother, who gave a small shake of her head, her expression unreadable. The silence pressed down on me like a weight. I gripped my fork tightly, my fingers trembling.
Can we talk about something else?
I blurted, forcing a laugh that sounded too brittle.
It's like a funeral in here.
Matt chuckled softly, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. But no one else joined in. My father shifted again, his jaw tight. My mother gave me a look, part disbelief, part concern, but said nothing. I turned to Matt, desperate for something to break the tension.
Hey, remember that time we got lost on our way to that concert? You swore you knew the shortcut, and we ended up in that creepy abandoned gas station?
He smiled, his face lighting up with the memory.
How could I forget? You wouldn't stop teasing me for weeks.
I mean, come on.
I said, laughing.
Who gets lost with GPS?
My mother's fork clattered against her plate.
Nicole,
She said softly, her voice trembling.
What?
I asked, frowning. She didn't respond. No one did. The silence was louder than anything I'd ever heard. The weeks dragged on, and recovery took its toll. Matt was always there, helping me when I couldn't manage on my own. At first, I was grateful. Then, I wasn't. It started with little things. I'd catch him watching me too closely as I struggled to put on a sweater or limp my way across the room. His presence, once comforting, began to feel stifling.
Can you not hover?
I snapped one afternoon, fumbling with a cup of tea that spilled over the counter. He rolled forward in his wheelchair, his voice calm as always.
I'm just trying to help.
Well, maybe I don't need your help.
I muttered, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. His silence should have been a relief, but it wasn't. He just sat there, his expression unreadable, before wheeling himself out of the kitchen. That night, as we ate dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. The sound of his fork scraping against the plate was like nails on a chalkboard. Each scrape seemed to echo my guilt back at me, louder and louder until I snapped.
You're not some kind of saint, you know.
I said, pushing my plate away with more force than necessary. He paused mid-bite, and set his fork down carefully, meeting my gaze evenly.
What's that supposed to mean?
His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach tighten.
It means you don't get to sit there all high and mighty, pretending you're okay with everything.
I shot back, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound firm.
I'm not pretending.
He said quietly, his words deliberate.
But you seem to be.
The words hit harder than they should have. I felt the heat rise in my face as I struggled to hold his gaze.
I'm not the one who's constantly pointing out how much I screwed up.
I haven't said a word about the accident.
He replied, his voice tight with restraint, though his eyes blazed with an unspoken accusation.
You're the one who brings it up every time you look at me.
I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor with a grating screech.
You're unbelievable. I'm trying to move on, but you...
Move on?
His voice was sharp now, cutting through the tension like a blade. He gestured to the wheelchair, his movements sudden and jerky.
You think you can just move on? You think I can? Look at me, Nicole. Do you think this just goes away?
The weight of his words crashed over me, leaving me momentarily stunned. My mouth opened to respond, but nothing came out. Instead, I stared at the floor, the knot of guilt in my chest tightening until it felt like I couldn't breathe.
Say something.
He pressed, his voice softer now, but no less cutting.
Tell me how this doesn't affect you every single day. Tell me how you don't see it, feel it.
I didn't mean for any of this to happen.
I whispered, my voice barely audible.
Neither did I.
He replied bitterly, his gaze hard. Days turned into weeks, and the fights only escalated. It was as if we were locked in a cycle, each argument digging the wound deeper. One night, after yet another pointless spat about nothing, dirty dishes, misplaced keys, something insignificant, I finally snapped.
You know what? I hate you.
I spat, the words venomous and bitter. The second they left my mouth, I wished I could take them back, but they hung there, heavy and irreversible. He froze, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white.
What did you say?
I hate you.
I repeated, quieter this time, my voice trembling under the weight of my own anger. His expression shifted, hurt, anger, and something deeper, something I didn't want to name.
You hated me that night too, didn't you?
He asked, his voice low and steady.
You hated me when you said it before the crash.
My stomach dropped. I turned away, unable to meet his gaze. The walls seemed to close in on me, the room suffocating in its silence.
That's not fair.
I murmured, but the words sounded weak, even to me.
It's the truth.
He said flatly. His voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of every unspoken accusation, every regret.
You didn't mean to say it then, and you don't mean to say it now. But it doesn't matter, does it? Once it's out, it's there.
I heard the wheels of his chair creak as he moved toward the door.
You can't keep running from this, Nicole.
He said before disappearing down the hallway. The silence he left behind was unbearable. I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the guilt rising like bile in my throat. I didn't mean to snap. I told myself I didn't, but his constant presence, his unspoken judgment, was suffocating. I dropped into a chair, burying my face in my hands. The words replayed in my mind over and over, each repetition another nail in the coffin of whatever was left between us. The sound of the wheels faded into the hallway, leaving a silence that felt heavier than his presence. I clenched my fists, trying to push down the guilt that rose like bile in my throat. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The dim glow of the streetlight outside filtered through the curtains, casting fractured shadows across the room. I could hear the faint creak of the house settling, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. But something felt wrong. I turned my head toward the doorway, half expecting to see him there, watching me like he had so many nights before. It was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone.
Matt?
I whispered into the dark. The sound of his name hung in the air, unanswered. I squeezed my eyes shut and rolled onto my side, telling myself I was imagining things. The exhaustion was getting to me, that was all. But just as sleep began to pull me under, I heard it.
Nicole.
His voice. My eyes snapped open, my heart hammering against my ribs. I bolted upright, scanning the room.
Matt?
The chair in the corner of the room where he usually sat was strangely absent. The silence was deafening. I climbed out of bed, ignoring the sharp protest of my healing body. My footsteps were cautious, almost hesitant, as I made my way to the living room. The house was dark and still, the kind of stillness that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe.
Matt?
I called again, louder this time. No answer. I turned on the light, my pulse racing. The room was empty. His wheelchair was gone. My legs buckled, and I sank to the floor, the memory slamming into me like a tidal wave. The crash, the rain, his scream. I saw his body crumpled in the wreckage, the life already drained from his eyes. My chest tightened as the truth clawed its way to the surface, undeniable and cruel. Matt wasn't here. He hadn't been here. He was dead. And I was alone.
Thank you for venturing into the Haunt Vault. If these tales left you looking over your shoulder, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for even more chilling stories every week. Your support helps keep the vault alive, so let us know your favorite story in the comments. And remember, the scariest monsters are often closer than you think, so sleep with one eye open. The darkness is never truly empty.